политик, ученый. В общем-то, он перед вами, это господин Россье. Значит, господин Россье говорит на 3 языках, и на всех 3 он нам может сообщить все, что он хочет. Но, как я понимаю, лучше его, для него французский, но говорить он будет по-английски. Также он спокойно говорит по-немецки, это я уже понял, когда был в посольстве, и немножко знает по-русски. Английский, не?
Я страдаю, я изучаю русский язык. Когда я говорю о серьезных темах, я предпочитаю говорить по-английски.
Вот,
Вы понимаете? Да.
Доклад господин Россье будет делать по-английски. Вы 2-й год уже в России?
2-й год.
2-й год в России.
Я приехал в феврале 17, как Керенский.
Надеемся, что у вас будет другая судьба. Ich habe eine andere Schicksal. Ich hoffe. Вот. И наша лаборатория крайне была заинтересована остается в контактах с серьезными европейскими деятелями, политиками, учеными, исследователями. Вот. И господин Россье как раз один из тех, кто принял наше приглашение. Это было, надо сказать, для меня немножко неожиданно. Вначале я был приглашен в резиденцию посла. Вы говорили, я уже подумал, почему не позвать его к нам? И вдруг, к моему удивлению, он сказал, конечно, давайте договоримся. И мы договорились на середину февраля, но вот практически середина февраля и наступила. И господин Россье у нас, пожалуйста, его слушайте, смотрите на него, фотографируйте его. Вот. Да, но господин посол разрешает их фотографировать.
Est-ce que je suis d'accord de...
Фотомахан.
Да.
Окей. Вот. А сейчас я представляю слово нашему проректору Ивану Валерьевичу Простакову, который, собственно, и будет вести, как я понимаю, хотя бы частично наше заседание.
Спасибо. Speak English and I'll switch to English too. Your Excellency, Mr. Cantor, dear colleagues, it's a very big pleasure to welcome once again Ambassador Россье at HSC University. Once again, because in December there was also a meeting, a lecture of the Ambassador and a meeting with the program of international trade policy. Actually, Ambassador Россье is a big specialist in law and in European studies because he's graduated from different universities. As I could see, you studied in Switzerland, obviously, also in Belgium, and you got your master's degree in Canada, in McGill University. And we have also a big and rich experience in different fields. You served at the Federal Department of Economic Affairs of Switzerland. You was the Director of Federal Social Insurance Office, and obviously you served also at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. So your experience and your studies are very rich and very useful for this particular meeting. And he will talk about perceptions between Russia and Europe. I suppose the main topic will be not mainly on political issues, political concerns of Russia and the European Union, because actually Europe is not on the European Union. And there is a big difference between countries in Europe, between their traditions in relations with Russia, but probably we have some common points to be discussed, not only in political field. Yesterday, by chance, I attended a ceremony at the European Union office in Moscow. There was a ceremony of awards for Russian students, and including students of Higher School of Economics, on their articles on relations between Europe and Russia. One of students from Lyon University shared his experience, a lecture at Guimau, also on European Union. And the first question of the lecture was how many people consider Russia, it was Russian in the lecture, how many people consider Russia as a European country? On approximately 100 students present there, only approximately 10 raised their hands. I had also a very interesting experience in France. I worked in France, in Paris, and some years ago I also was a lecturer. I held a lecture on relations between the European Union and Russia at École Polytechnique of Paris, one of the most prestigious universities in France. I started also with the same question. I had in front of me approximately 50, 60 students, and only 5 raised their hands. So I suppose, in fact, that we have a lot of things to understand, to discuss, and I hope also that this today's meeting, will help us to understand better each other and to work closely together. We need it. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
What matters always is perception, much more than reality. Perception means how do I see something, somebody, or a country, or how do I see myself? And the introduction of the professor is only talking about that. How do we see ourselves? How do we see the other? And there is always an interaction between how do we see ourselves and how do we see the other. First. Second, I have a personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion. I'm one of the 5 or of the 10 that the professor mentioned. Why? I traveled in my previous job in half the countries of the world. To me, and now I've been 2 years in Russia, and I've been everywhere. In Dagestan, in Norilsk, in Tinda, in Severobaikalsk, in Kabardino-Balkaria, in Ingushetia, in Grozny, in Rostov. I've been in many places. I don't feel in a foreign country. Of course, there are differences between Russia and my country. Yes. But there are as well differences between my country and Sweden, or between my country and Portugal. And the differences in my perception are not bigger than between my country and Portugal. But they are much bigger between my country and China, or Pakistan, or Ethiopia, or Somalia, or Argentina, or whatever. Okay, this is my point of view. We can discuss it, and I will come to it later. The way Russia is perceived in the rest of Europe, I say the rest of Europe, I don't say Europe. What the professor says is what is perhaps the situation today. it has not always been like that. It has always changed. The perception of Russia in, let's say, the West, the rest of Europe, has been constantly changing through the ages. So it's not once and for all. Sometimes in Western Europe, Russia was perceived as similar, very close, 1815, 1905, under Catherine II. And sometimes Russia was perceived as completely different after the revolution or under Nicholas I. And it was back again under Alexander II. So it has constantly changed. So today, maybe, many people think it's completely different. In 20 years, it might be different as well. What matters is what makes our perception change, because they change. Let's take one example. After Poltava, with Peter. Peter is a typical, what we call in French, despot éclairé, autocrat with reason, enlightened autocrat. When he gets to power, he's perceived by the rest in Western Europe as one of them. You will say, it's the elite. Of course, it's the elite anyway. I mean, the farmers in my country, they couldn't read or write and so on. They did not know there was Russia. They did not know there was Greece. They did not know there was Portugal. We're talking about the people who are doing politics and so on. That was a moment when Russia was perceived very similar. Although Russia was powerful, and Russia was, one could say, aggressive, expanding the territory. So the perception of closeness had nothing to do with the foreign policy of Russia. Russia was aggressive because it was always, the problems were always in the West, with the Poles, with the Swedes, with the Lithuanians, and so on. But Russia was perceived as close, as one of us. Under Nicholas I, Russia's foreign policy was very quiet, except a little bit in the southeast of Europe. But Russia was perceived again completely different. Second example, 1815. Russia is everywhere in Europe. Alexander I is in Vienna, the Russian army are in my country, they are in Paris, they go to the bars, they don't have much time, so they say bistro, bistro. That's why we say a bar in French is a bistro. We say a bistro. It was because of the Russian soldiers in 1815. It's a moment where these enlightened autocrats want to re-establish power in Europe. So they are all think the same. Metternich thinks the same as Alexander I. So again, the Russian army is everywhere in Europe. Russia is perceived very close. It changes between 1820 and 1830. But what changes? It's not Russia that changes. It's the liberal revolutions in Europe. Suddenly, the idea that the best form of state is an autocrat who's reasoning, who wants to work for his country, enlightened, with the lights in his head, this idea falls down. It falls down, and the liberal revolutions are there because you've got many people who say, we want to say our word. And this liberal revolution, at the beginning, they don't succeed in Western Europe. But the people in power in Western Europe, they use the Russian army to crush these revolts. And then suddenly, Russia is perceived as the enemy of the liberal revolutions. Not because of something that happened in Russia, it's still Alexander I. But suddenly, the perception changes. And these people, the decabrists, they saw this coming. And when they come back to Russia, again, the closeness is the same. They want the same. No, they fail. My second example is between 1905 and 1970. You do not imagine how, in that period, Russia was popular in the rest of Europe. Everybody was translating the great Russian literature. Everybody was going to the Russian opera. Russian restaurants were opened everywhere. Everybody was investing in Russia. Everybody was exporting in Russia. My country, I come from a small country. Today, there are 700 Swiss living in Russia. It's not much. 700. In 1910, there were 2,000 teachers, only teachers. And there were tens of thousands of Swiss in Russia. So this period, 1905, 1917, is a period of closeness, extreme closeness again. Everybody sees the tide going in the same direction. And Russia is extremely popular. Not because something changed in Europe, but something has changed in Russia this time. So you see the perception. They are always influenced by what happens in your country and by what happens in the countries of the others. To me, the catastrophe was 1917. Jean-Baptiste Durosel, the French historian, say that's the time where Russia is kicked out of Europe. Because there it follows a completely different path from the other countries. It's not completely true. What happens in Russia in 1917, we can discuss it, and this could go for hours, but the first factor was the terrible First World War. Millions of soldiers died for nothing. And it was an industrialized war with cannons, with the first tanks, with poisonous gas. So all this dream of constant progress towards more social liberties, towards more prosperity, towards a better cultural level, this idea that the progress is slow, at different rhythm, depending on the country, but always goes into the right direction. In 1917, 1918, because of the First World War, this idea died. This idea died. There is no progress. When 100,000 people can die in 2 hours on a battlefield for 200 meters of mud, where is the progress? There is no progress. It's nonsense. And this had influence as well in the arts. Suddenly the reality was destroyed. You had abstract arts, Dada, and so on. Nonsense, absurd. And then you have these two ideologies, Nazism and Bolshevism, that are coming out of the First World War. What do they have in common? They have something in common very important. It's they think there can be progress in history, but not through a slow evolution, but through a fight to the death between enemies. For the Nazis, Germany has to kill all its enemies to make a better world for Germans. When it invades the territories of Eastern Europe, those people, they are animals. They are not humans. They have to be eliminated, killed, all of them. For the Bolsheviki, it's exactly the same thing. The civil war is a war to the death. They are the enemies of the people. Enemies of the people have to be killed. They are not part of the people. So this sort of Darwinian ideology, that there is a fight and the stronger survives and the stronger will make the progress. This is the child of the First World War. So even that evolution in Russia is not so different, because you have the same approach on a different way in Germany or in Italy and in various countries in Europe. So even that is not completely different. But what matters is that in 1970 there is this cut. I told you, 20,000 Swiss, because Switzerland was poorer than Russia in 1905. You think Switzerland is rich. we have been extremely poor. In the 19th century, we were one of the poorest countries of Europe. So between 1905 and 1915, tens of thousands of Swiss emigrated to Russia. Not only to Russia, as well to America, to Canada, to Argentina, because we had nothing. So many went to Russia in those days. And today, 100 years later, in Russia, there are only 700. And that's because of 1970. That made a cut between contacts, exchange, all these contacts and exchange that always took place before. If you take the intellectual debate, what Malinowski writes, what Pushkin writes in the 19th century, other people were writing it in the rest of Europe too. So there you have a strong separation, no people exchange, and of course an official propaganda which makes the partition even stricter. At the end of 1945, at the end of the Second World War, in Western Europe, for a short period of time, maybe 6 months, 1 year, Russia is very popular again, because they helped to beat the Germans and the Nazis. And there Stalin sees the same danger as with the decabrists, because you've got the Russian soldiers everywhere in Europe. And he knows, when they come back, they will tell what they saw, like the decabrists after 1815. So at that moment, the Soviet Union launches terrible propaganda against the rest of Europe. They are enemies, they want to destroy the Soviet Union, there is no collaboration that's possible, it's an enemy and so on. And this was not the situation. But of course, after 1 year or two, or after 3 years, I would say until Czechoslovakia 48, then the perception changes again. Suddenly, it's not Russia, it's the Soviet Union, very big country, lots of tanks, very nasty, no public liberties, and then it's again perceived as a danger. So you see, it changes all the time. So don't think the perception you can hear today will be there in 20 years. Don't think they are right. Make your own opinion and make your own perception. That's what matters. My second point is the question that Professor Cantor was asking to me was, how do we see Russia today? It's very difficult to tell you. I can tell you how I see Russia, but it's only my opinion, so I don't think it's very important. I would say, when I watch your television, you think I should speak? Should not speak too loud? No, it's okay. When I watch your television, with the informations about my country and the neighboring countries, I don't understand what I see. I have the impression that in Western Europe, according to some television programs or television shows, all men are gay, all women are prostitutes, and which is very strange, because if all men are gay, I don't see how prostitutes can earn any money, by the way. And everybody hates Russia. I never met anybody who hates Russia. When, especially now, when I'm very often in Switzerland or in the neighboring countries, what I see from the people is first curiosity. Because Russia is far away, it's not a country like France where you can go for the weekend and so on, so they want to know. How is it? How are the people? Are they friendly? How is the nature? Do people still read books? How is the food? So what I feel is not at all a hostility. Never, and I would not say if it weren't true. But it's more a curiosity due to these 70 years without contacts, where the contacts were really very limited. Now it's better. Now there are more people going to Russia or from Russia going to the rest of Europe, but this takes time to change the perception. So the first thing I would say, curiosity. Then at the political level, Russia is usually a projection of what you want. If I talk to a conservative politician, he will tell me Russia is wonderful because the good traditional values are still being lived there. Why does he like that? Because that's what he likes. It's the same with many countries. If you ask somebody in Switzerland, how do you see America? Usually, some people who are liberal would say it's the land of the free. If you were a socialist, you would say, oh no, it's the land of the big trust, of capitalism without limits, and so on. So what you don't know very well, you always identify with your own projections. So don't take that too seriously. I've met people, I give you one example, a deputy in Switzerland, member of parliament. I was talking with him about Russia, and he told me he's from a very right-wing party. He doesn't like the Muslims. And he told me, you know, we should have Vladimir Putin in Switzerland. You say, why do you say that? Say, if we had Putin in Switzerland, there would be no Muslim in Switzerland. And I told him, but you know, there are 15% Muslims in Russia, and they are Russian citizens. And he looked at me and he said, come on, it's true, it's a joke. He did not believe me. So, complete ignorance and just a projection of what you want. But it has nothing to do with Russia. I could have explained to him the fall of Kazan to Iran and Tatarstan now and the North Caucasus and all that. It's lost time. He was not interested. He was just interested in his own political dreams or nightmares. So, if you speak to a European, and if he tells you, I like Russia, don't be happy. Just wait. Ask him, why do you like Russia? And then listen to what he says. And if somebody tells you, I don't like Russia, don't hate him. Ask, why don't you like Russia? And then you might see, sometimes, it's not it's not what you think. Again, because we are talking about perceptions above all. There are critics, it's true. There are critics at the political level because these critics are directed at the way Russia is governed. But these critics are addressing to the state. So there are critics against the presidential administration, human rights, and so on. But you have lots of critics against President Trump as well. So a critic against a government or what a government does is not a critic against a country or a people. Maybe some people do not make the difference when they make the critics, so tell them, be careful. What are you talking about? A government? Okay, you can criticize the government. I criticize my own government, not when I'm ambassador, but when I'm a citizen in my country. But when I criticize my government, it doesn't mean I hate my country. So don't confuse the critics against the way a country is governed, and you can say you're right, you're not right, you can enter into discussion, but it doesn't mean the country is not being interested into or is being hated. And this leads me to the other point, and I think for you it's the most important. Don't ask yourself how the others see you. Ask yourself how you see yourself. How do you see Russia? And what do you want to make out of your country? Nekrasov says it, you old Grajdansky. What your country becomes is you who decide. It's not foreign powers or hostile powers or CIA or whatever. It's about you. And if you read the intellectual history of Russia, this has been a constant question. And this is very European. This constant question, who are we? Are we like the others? What do we have in common? Only Europeans think this way. In China, you don't have that. In India, you don't have it. In Pakistan, you don't have it. That's why, for me, Russia is just a European country. With differences, yes, like every European country. I would say the main debate was between people like Chadayev on one side and Uvarov's China on the other side. And even that should not be limited to an absolute opposition. Because you don't have the choice between imitating somebody or doing your own fate. There is a middle way. There have been always exchanges between countries, people, nations, civilization, and so on. We all learn from each other. It does not mean we imitate. It does not mean we are children and the others are professors. We learn from all these exchanges. I mean, the Swiss constitution was clearly, in 1848, basically a copy of the American constitution. Not because we were stupid, because we thought, that's a very interesting way of governing a federal country. I don't feel bad because we copied the American in their constitutions. And the Turk, they copied our civil code. I don't think the Turks feel bad because they copied the Swiss civil code. Just for one reason, because some people wanted the French civil code in Turkey, other people wanted the German civil code, and they were fighting. So instead of fighting, they say, okay, we don't take the French, we don't take the German, we take the Swiss civil code, and it's okay. And it works as well. You have people as well in this period, like Nekrasov or like Herzl. These people refuse this dead conflict between imitating or following your own fate. Every nation in Europe has its own identity. It does not mean we cannot share it and work together. We have to live in it. And Dostoevsky, I think, said it very well. You have to bring these things together. And Russia has something to bring in Europe, like every other European country. And that is what makes me sad now. Because of this confrontation period, it's not a moment when Russia can give to Europe what it can give to it. And Navarrete as well. So what is it to be European? When the professors say, do you feel European? First we should say, what does it mean to be European? For Professor Cantor, when he writes about being a European, he means culture. Culture is a very broad concept. So it's impossible to disagree, but we have to say what is in this culture. And for us, today, I think Europeans, the culture is first the heritage of the past. It's our Christian past. And the Christian past, you can say it all through the ages, with the primacy of the person, because if every individual is wanted and created by God and has a personal relationship with God, it means this person is very, very important. And you have, therefore, a straight line between Christianity and the human rights. You have then, as well, and this I would add to the definition of culture from Professor Cantor, the political culture. We have a common background, and it's in the European Convention of Human Rights, which every European country has signed. Russia has signed it. To me, that makes it Russia, a European country. Full stop. And if I'm telling myself, as a Swiss, or as a Russian, or as whatever, I'm not European, then what am I? When I meet Russians who tell me, no, we are not European, I say, okay, that's very interesting. What are you? I hear we have Asian values. And then I ask, what is an Asian value? So I mean, Asian value must be a value that you find in Pakistan, in Thailand, in Japan, in China, and in India. I don't think you would find one. What does it mean? What does it mean, Asian value? And so, if you are not European, when you are a European country, that's the danger. If you're not European, what are you? I don't think you are anything. If Switzerland, if we decide we are not a European country, where are we? So, one should be aware, just to say, it's not what I want, or I don't like the state of Europe now. Maybe, some people, sometimes I don't like it as well. By refusing something, you must say it on a positive way, saying, what are you? If you're not European, what are you? And this is a question I very often ask when I hear some people in Russia telling me, or people in Western Europe who tell me, come on, Russia is not a European country. They say, very interesting opinion. So what is it? And then there is nothing. Nothing comes. Nothing comes. So I think one should recognize the things we have in common. We are, the tradition of Europe has always been the diversity and the variety of power centers. It was not the case in China. It was not the case in India. It was always the case in Europe. And this diversity is part of this continent. And in this diversity, these countries have always found a way of fitting things together. And it goes down to the very deep culture. You've got expression in Russian that are a literal translation of expression in French. To hold the candle, for instance. How do you say? Держать свечку. We say in French to hold the candle. In Chinese, you don't say to hold the candle. In Hindi, you don't say it. We read the same books. When I read the books, when I was reading before I came, we had, in high school, we read the Russian authors, like we read the German authors, like we read Shakespeare, and so on. And in these books, these people I see, I know people like that. I know people like Chitikov. I know people like Bazarov. I even know a few Smerdyakov in the mid in Switzerland.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a few of them. So you see that this closeness is the thing that matters. It doesn't mean we will not disagree. It does not mean we will strongly disagree on many things. But Europe has never been something that should be based on one soul and unique identity. Some people tried it, like Adolf Hitler, but I don't think it's the thing we want. That was perfectly not a European project. And then I would say three things, but this is a personal view. It's really personal. After these 2 years of Russia, I thought about the question of the Professor Cantor. I would say the three things that matters, and I still have a big consequence today. The first is this isolation of the Soviet Union. I told you, tens of thousands of Swiss in 1910, 700 today. So we lost time, because we lost 70 years of exchanges that have not taken place. So we need time to catch up. First thing. Second thing, slavery. Slavery was abolished late in Russia. And this makes a big difference. You would tell me slavery was everywhere in Europe. It's true. Slavery was even basic, essential in Rome, and Rome is our ancestor of the state. It's true as well. There are two differences. First is the freedom of the farmers came much earlier in Central and Western Europe than in Russia. In Russia, it was only thanks to Alexander Staroy. It came later. It doesn't mean they were happy, those farmers. They were poor. They were dying of hunger. They were uneducated. But they were no things. They were people. The second is the abolition of slavery. The French had slavery. The Black Code of Louis XIV was the code of the rules of slavery, not in France, only abroad, in the colonies. So the slaves were not French. The difference between the slavery for the Portuguese, for the Spaniards, for the French, was that for them, the slaves were other people. Whereas these unfree farmers, they were Russians. And actually the other people, the people in the North Caucasus or the Poles, usually they were not slaves. The slaves were Russians. Same in America. America abolished slavery very late. The slavery was not abroad, like for the French, Spaniards, for the Portuguese. It was in America, but they were black. It was racist slavery. You had a black face, you came as a slave, you were a slave. You had a white face, you came to America, you were not a slave. And again, they were out of the national community. The very strange thing in Russia is that slavery stays so long and is applied on people who are Russian. They are Orthodox. They go to the church. So they speak the same language. They don't come from far away. And the third important point, and then I would like to open the discussion, it's what happened in the western part of Russia or of the Soviet Union between 1917 and 1945. You had, in that time, 50 million people killed. Not by earthquakes, but killed by man. That's the biggest massacre in human history. 50 million people died of violent death. You had the death of the First World War, Civil War, famine 2021, then famine again, Stalin purge, and then the Nazis, and then the Second World War, plus you had all the ones that died in the Gulag, and the Chechens that were evacuated, the Ingush, and the Cherkess, and so on, 50 million people. And that's terrible. It's not the only place where it happened, but it's the first time it happened in human history. Then came China, later there were a lot of deaths as well, it's true. But that was after. We're now talking about Europe, the European continent. The difference between the cruelty of the Nazi regime and of Stalin's Russia is that the Nazi regime first lasted only 12 years, not so long, and second, it was killing other people. The Nazi regime didn't kill many Germans. Most of the Jews, even of Germany, they could get away because they saw it coming bit by bit. It's the Jews of Poland, of Corfu, of Hungary, of White Russia, of Lithuania. All these Jews, they had no chance. But the Nazi regime was taking very care of sparing their own citizens. Even the extermination camp, they were not made on German territory. Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz, they were all built outside of Germany. You had concentration camps. But the mass killings of the Nazi regime were all committed mostly against foreigners or people perceived as different like the Jews, but there were Poles, Russian prisoners of wars, Ukrainians, and so on, and outside of its own country. Whereas the Stalin terror was killing Russians or Soviet citizens. It was Soviet citizens who were killing Soviet citizens. Even in the Ukraine, when I talk to my Ukrainian friends and they tell me, look what the Russians did to us in the famine, I have to tell them, sorry, the Communist Party of the Ukraine Socialist Republic was implementing those measures. And the young activists that were going to the farm, taking the grain from the farmers, they were Ukrainians too. And that makes it much more difficult. It makes it more difficult because if you are German, you can say, I'm sorry. You can go to the Poles and say, I'm sorry. You can go to Israel and say, I'm sorry. You can go to Russia and say, I'm sorry, and so on. You can or sorry to the French even. Whereas if your own people kill your own people, how do you say you are sorry? To whom do you talk? I have a Russian friend. He's got 2 grandfathers, like everybody. One of his grandfathers was an NKVD agent, and he told me he killed probably 2,000 people with a shot in the neck. And his other grandfather spent 70 years in Magadan. And he tells me, who am I? Should I say, I'm sorry for one grandfather? Or should I say, I want justice for the other grandfather? The Germans, they don't have that problem. And I think these 3 elements are the things that matter, or that would matter for me if I were Russian. But again, never forget, the way you're perceived by the others, it depends on you. Second, the way you're perceived by the others, it does not matter. What matters is how you perceive yourselves. And third, your country, it's your problem. Not other people will take care of the destiny of your own country. What Russia will be in 50 years, it will be your job. The job and the people that are of your age and that are like you. It's in your hands and you have to decide. And don't worry about what the other thinks. Just do the right. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Frankly speaking, I learned many, maybe a little but very important things that will change also my own perception of history, Russia and Europe. We are going to open the discussion and question and answer session, but if I may, I have also quite different questions, but I'd like to ask you only one thing. Finally, how is Russia, how is the perception of Russia in Europe now, today? Is it the kind of continuation of the previous perception during the last 70 years? If you say that only a few Swedes are in Russia now, is it true that today's Russia, is perceived as a continuation of Soviet Union?
No, definitely not, because there was this perception of Soviet Union, it ended with Gorbachev.
Yes, that's true.
There Russia was perceived as completely different. Everybody wanted to go to Russia. It was easy to travel and so on. And there Russia was perceived very, very positively. I'm sure Gorbachev would have been elected president in many European countries. And actually, the end of the Soviet Union, if you compare with the end of Yugoslavia, or the end of the British Empire in India, or of the French Empire in Algeria, the end of the Soviet Union was a masterpiece of peaceful change. It's incredible. Usually, when empire collapses, lots of people are dying. So, the perception of Russia that was actually, I remember I was 28. We were reading papers. Everybody was going back to its classic. You were taking Tolstoy, taking the dust off, and reading it again, and so on. You had my brother was an art director, so he decided to put all Chekhov pieces in his theater, and so on. So there was, I think, what changed again. It's not Russia. Well, Russia changed as well, but what changed in Europe is that the interest was directed on Russia in that moment. And then, with the fall of the Iron Country, the interest shifted to the old European countries that were forgotten since the Second World War. So the interest went from Russia to Poland, to Hungary, to Czechoslovakia, and so on. And I think what happens, we lost the sight on Russia. Russia was when you had the Soviet Union so close with the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union was in Berlin. When the Soviet Union falls, and when these Eastern European countries move west, suddenly Russia is far away. So I think what happened was distance. It was not for intellectuals, but for politicians it was distance. And I remember I was already in government, nobody had a Russian policy. Everybody had a policy towards Poland, towards Turkey, towards Bulgaria, and to Russia. No, it was complicated, very messy, very difficult to understand. So it's more in that time, interest was lost, I would say. But as the continuation of the Soviet Union, certainly not. In as much as the Soviet Union was not the continuation of something else. The Soviet Union was a break with Russia between the revolution of 1905 and 1917. So the perception now is limited again. We still have this distance, but there is more curiosity. And when critics are emitted, it's usually against the government, but not against the country itself. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, I answered it as good as I could.
Yeah. Once again, the main purpose is probably to understand the personal perception of everyone here and your own. We are not talking about governments and political opinions. You started with this important point that the perception is first of all the personal perception. The perception of other people and of yourself. It's clear that your answer is very clear in this way. And once again, I invite you now to ask questions or to invite you for comments. Who wants to take the floor?
Come on, the first question is difficult. After it's okay.
No, it could be. I have several. Thank you so much for your presentation.
You have 7 questions.
Yes, I have several questions.
Several.
Several questions. But I do not know what questions should be pronounced in the first one. Maybe start from the very important question. Maybe we go back to this question at the very end of our session.
Do you see any opportunity for Russia to make an input to the field of so-called big ideas? You know that in Europe, generally, in Europe as a continent, we feel a lack of leadership, of big ideas, of clear vision of the future. And when in different grounds of discussions like Brexit and other European problems, we are discussing that we do not see the future. We need some big ideas coming from somewhere. Do you see that Russia, even in this complicated situation, when their image somehow questionable, could offer or has a potential to offer interesting ideas? And would those ideas be positively perceived in Europe? Because Russia now is sitting somehow between 2 chairs, and you mentioned that period in early 90s, when the interest to Russia was lost and substituted to the interest to small Eastern European countries, it was a project of enlarging European Union. But we all know that Russia offered association with Europe, common European space in early 90s, and this project was on the table. Afterwards, it was, procrastinated and then forgotten, totally forgotten. But Russia, early before Ukraine and other Eastern European countries, just directly offered to be the member of European Union.
Yes.
That was very interesting. And then it was such kind of mental substitution. No Russia on this arena, just Eastern European countries, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, blah, blah, blah. So absolutely different project in terms of scale, in terms of contact. So that is one point. But maybe under the complicated situation in the world, it's the right time, maybe not now, maybe a little bit later, to start with any kind of intellectual offer from the side of Russia. Do you have any expectations in Europe? Or maybe you have expectations from Germany, or Britain, or France, or maybe Switzerland could offer something interesting for the future of Europe.
You said many things that I fully agree to. The first thing is that in the relations between Russia and the rest of Europe, there have been many, many missed opportunities. And what you say was a big missed opportunities, and it was missed by the European countries. Yes. So there are many moments where there could be a meeting, and the meeting does not happen because one is not there at the right moment. And that was a critical point, and I think we lost perhaps 20 or 30 years because that opportunity was not taken. Second, a project now no chance, because the European countries, member of the European Union, we are now dealing with internal problems. And when you are dealing with internal problems, it's very difficult to deal with external problems as well. The Brexit case is a terrible nightmare for the United Kingdom, especially, but as well for the other European member of the European Union. And then we have the new wave of populism in Western Europe. We have, so when you are busy, it's like when I have a big headache, I have difficulties of concentrating about something else or reading a book. It's basically the same situation for society, and for politicians it's exactly the same. But what I can tell you is that nobody, and when I was vice minister, we talked about Russia in all European capitals. I never saw a European capital where they tell me we have to get rid of Russia, we have to eliminate Russia, whatever. No, everybody says it would be really better if we had found an understanding. My question was, okay, how? I have no idea. So the basic attitude, I would say, is positive, but nobody knows how to do it. And nobody thinks about how to do it. I would say the problem now is Ukraine. But I know if the question of Ukraine is solved in a peaceful way, I think that would solve almost all the other problems. And this is something Russia can do with the Ukrainians. Whatever the Russians do and decide, in agreement with the Ukrainians, I know at least the American, I cannot talk for the Americans, but I mean, that's something different. But the Western European countries, they would support it. And I'm sure Russia and Ukraine can, if they want, solve this problem together. And the solution is pretty clear. So, because everybody says, this is the problem, and if this problem is solved, there would be no reason to continue. So that would definitely change the map completely. It would completely change the map. But it's in the hand of the Russians and of the Ukrainians. The Europeans, I don't think they have the means, and I don't think we have the will. It's not a problem of having good ideas. Everybody can have good ideas. How can you give you 5 good ideas on a piece of paper after? The problem is to invest diplomatic efforts and time and political energy in a good ideas. The problem is not a lack of ideas. The problem is the lack of capacity of investing all this energy on a mid-term project now on the European continent. This energy, this disponibility is not here now.
Thank you for your presentation, and my question, I think, is close to the previous one. it is about atheists. Maybe you know that the laboratory headed by Professor Kantor is focused, first of all, on Russian philosophy. And you said that Russian culture, Russian literature, opera, ballet was very popular in Europe.
It still is. Yeah.
Oh, okay, it still is. And what is about Russian philosophy? Vladimir Solovyov, Russian philosopher, not contemporary churches. Nicholas Berdyaev, and so on. Are they not popular but known in...
Well, philosophers are usually not popular. Not everybody reads them. Huh? I mean, if I like Kant a lot, but if I talk in Switzerland about people, they say, do you know who is Kant? The majority of people, they never heard about it. So the majority... Yes, it's not a bestseller. So not everybody knows Kant, but not everybody knows Berdyaev, you're right. I think the Russian philosophical tradition started a bit later. It started in the 19th century. Huh? We had the big ages of liberal philosophy that ends up with Kant. Kant dies in 1804. And then we have the Romantics and the Marxists and the national... and Russia follows another way. The ones, I haven't read lots of them. I've read a bit of Herzen and Berdyaev, of course. And they are studied in philosophy, in the philosophy faculties and in the Slavistic faculties. So, no, they are not very famous, not very well known, less than the writers, but they are not less known than other philosophers. Because again, among the people dealing with philosophy, yes, they are. But it's mostly 19th century. Soviet philosophers of the Soviet time are not very well known or read. They are not very taken seriously. The thinkers, the Russian thinkers of the 20th century are mostly people of the emigration. You know, these people who went out and started to teach in universities in Western Europe, in America. And I have something for you. It was where is the bag? I had the lady, yes, here. I always take lots of chocolate for the first question. Because it's very, he was very courageous by asking the first question.
Илья заработал.
Мы потели.
No, but you're not a student. He's a student. It's more difficult for the student. But I'm sure he will give you. I'm sure he will give you some.
I think he's a real philosopher.
Yes.
So philosophers, they are thinking about big ideas, not about chocolates, I think, too much. I'm from the economical department, that's why
It doesn't decide that we finish with the first question.
No.
So other questions or comments? Yeah, please.
What do you think about the idea of Charles de Gaulle, United States of Europe from Atlantic to Ural?
I mean, what does that mean? United States of Europe. It's not a project. It's only a phrase. The only construction, political construction going on today in Europe is the European Union. There is nothing else. And the European Union will not dissolve into something bigger. So, on the European continent, you have two ways of dealing with the fact that there is the European Union. Either you become member of it, and then you solve the problem, or you spend all your time thinking about your relation with the European Union. And that's what we do in Switzerland, and that's what the British are discovering. So there is nothing else. There is nothing else, and there will never be anything else. You have, the European has a way, is a method. It's not a state, it's not an international organization, it's just a method. It's a method by which states decide to take decisions together. You have, I think it's very strange in Russia. In Russia, they see always two circles in the European Union. Brussels bad, bureaucrats without a soul, and then the capitals, Berlin, we know, the Germans we know, the French we know, and that's okay. Huh? But they miss the most important. You have three circles in the European Union. You have Brussels, the institutions, the common institutions. Then you have the member states, that's okay. But the most important is the third circle. It's the member states in the institutions. They decide. The Council of Ministers is the biggest, the most powerful institution in the European Union. It's made out of the 28 or maybe 27 ministers, agriculture, foreign policy, and whatever. So this is the particularity of this method, and it's in constant movement. So there will never be something bigger in which the European Union will dissolve, because they control this. So either you are a member of it, or you stay out, but you have constantly to reinvent your relation with it. Why was the European founded? The first reason was to avoid wars between its members. Because there were two civil wars in Europe, the First and the Second World War, that was enough. And by pooling sovereignty together, you make sure there will never be war, and that has worked. Today, we don't need that anymore, you could say. But today, there is something else. The two big powers now is US and China. The European countries, if they are alone, they don't exist anymore. The British are discovering it. They go out of the European Union, they said, we will make big agreements with the Chinese. The Chinese, they told them, no, please, for us it's European Union, that's important. Even the Americans reacted this way. So you have a choice. Either you pull together, or you become irrelevant. And you've got nothing else. You've got China and the US. So, in my eyes, if Russia and the other countries of Europe would pull together, who would be stronger than the Americans and stronger than the Chinese? So if I'm a Chinese or if I'm an American, maybe I would not want that. It's better that they are separated. But if I'm a European or a Russian, why do I do that? And the European put together is the biggest economy in the world. And it has as well this political culture, this tradition that we have in the Convention of Human Rights that is important for us. Russia alone, between China and the European Union, is just not big enough. It has nuclear missiles, it's true. It has oil and gas, but you see in its participation, its proportion of world trade, it's a few %. And when Russians tell me, well, we don't need Europe, we can deal with China, I always tell them, but think about it. Because with the Chinese, it's like this. Chinese, okay, you have more nuclear weapons, but that's the end of the world. But for all the rest, China is the second most powerful economy and maybe soon, someday, the strongest. Whereas in the European context, Russia is one of the biggest, and probably the biggest with Germany now. Huh? So where are you stronger? Together, as Dostoevsky said, we bring to them what we have and take in exchange what we have in common. This would make everybody strong. The fact that Russia and the rest of Europe are on bad terms now, that there is no cooperation or no plan, as the lady said, it makes everybody weaker. But I would say it makes probably Russia weaker than the rest of the European countries. But everybody loses, yes. So, again, there will be no bigger constructions than the European Union, because that would request the European Union to dissolve. And if no country has an interest to dissolve it. So it can develop and reorganize itself with new members, but I think that's what matters. But again, it's a personal opinion.
questions?
In what ways do you think Russia...
Maybe you can introduce you.
Yes, surely. Anastasia Lodosova, faculty of international affairs. I believe that collaboration is really important nowadays. And in what ways do you think that we can collaborate in European and Russia? What are the specific areas in which we can collaborate mostly, probably? And also, what are the cultural features that we share that might help this collaboration?
But it's not true that there is no collaboration.
No,
There is a lot of collaboration between Russia and
yes,
Europe.
I wonder, I'm interested in your opinion about specific areas that you think are more effective in terms of our collaboration.
I mean, the most important in my eyes would be scientific education and science. I mean, you've got excellent brains in Russia, probably all of you, the majority of you. You have excellent brains. The collaboration with the European universities and reforms of universities in Russia as well. I mean, this goes in pair. So I would say the more there we don't do enough. But there should be more exchange of students, of course, but especially more exchange of teachers, more exchange of researchers, of assistants, and all that. I think this is there. I would say the place where we should do more than that. We have one difficulty: it's the language. In Switzerland, we have the only university among the top 50 that is not American or English. It's the Polytechnical School in Zurich. Why? Because 60% of the teachers are foreigners. No, 70% of the teachers are foreigners, and more than 50% of the students are foreigners. If you want to be the best, you have to open your doors and your windows to everybody. And they gave the possibility to do it in English. It was a long debate. They did not want it. Because for us, the language, for you as well, for the French, it was the same. But there it was clear, if you want to be at the top worldwide, get the best teacher from everywhere. That's what we need. And in the case of Zurich, it worked. And I know some of your universities are thinking about it, because if you are a clever Chinese, a clever Pakistani, a clever Argentine, you speak English. So you would go to a place where English is spoken. Russia is a big barrier. Russia is a big barrier. The Chinese, they have changed it already. You know, the majority of the Chinese universities, you can do a postgraduate degree in English. I think that would probably help to open it to English. I like my own language, and I think it's a shame, but I mean, it's the only way to be at the top.
And do you share some cultural features with Switzerland, in Russia and Switzerland, and where you
know, what is cultural features of Switzerland? I'm French speaking. I'm by birth a Roman Catholic. I live in Italy. You have people in my country that speak Italian, that are Protestants, and that live in mountains. What do we have in common? Huh? We don't read the same books. We don't hear the same music. The only thing we have in common in Switzerland is the political culture. We all have the political culture of the control of the citizens on the state, on all levels, and so on. That's what matters. So I have more in common with the Russian culturally than with many Swiss of my own country. And I don't mention Swedes or Greeks. So this is definitely obvious. I think religion, even if we are not a believer, religion has a huge impact on the way we see the world. And Orthodox spirituality and Catholic spirituality are extremely close. We have the confession. I mean, the confession, if you read your authors, how is it important to get rid of your sins when you committed a crime? It's the same in the books of the French or German Catholic authors. You always have the same subject. This is the common culture. But this, I don't have it with the Swiss that lives 20 kilometers from my country, but I share it with the Russian. And this is, again, this is Europe. This is all these things that makes it together.
Another question about collaboration. Nowadays, is that collaboration isn't possible without economic cooperation. But if Russia and the European Union have to close their economics, to make a closer, how can it be possible? I mean, the members, members of the European Union, they are solid economies. I mean, Germany, French, was Switzerland in its bank system. Russia, you know, Russia has been focused with its structural economy and in Europe for resources, mineral resources. But the European Union was built on the same structures of economies. I mean, manufacturing. How can, and my question is, would Russia be just a resource addition to Europe?
I mean,
to collaborate?
No, I think it's always a mistake to base the economy on natural resources. It's always a mistake. And 1970, Russia has the highest industrial production in Europe in 1970. Russia is ahead of Germany and is second worldwide behind the United Kingdom in 1970. Not everybody knows that. So of course, there was between 1905 and 1970 in Russia a huge industrial boom and peaceful, not with forced labor and so on. So I think, but that's a decision that the authorities of the country decide. Where do we put priority? Is it on natural resources or is it on manufacturing? If you put it on manufacturing, you need a knowledge economy. And for that, of course, you need competition. When I talk to Swiss companies active in Russia, they say, if they are here, it means they are happy to be here. Huh? But when I ask them what are the problems, and they say it's a lack of competition. Too big presence of the state in the economy. You know, it was 12–13% at the beginning of Yeltsin era, and now it's above 70%. So the strong presence of the state has an impact on competition. And for industrial product to be competitive, you need this competition. If you shield from competition, you lose the contact with the others. And but this is a decision that's not being made outside of Russia. This is a decision, of course. With natural resources, you know, you will always get money because everybody needs oil, gas, or wet. Now you're the biggest exporter of wet again, agricultural products. To bet on industry is definitely, in my country, it's what put my country out of poverty, out of misery. I mean, we were a miserable country in 1850. But to put the priority on manufacturing, you need to put priority as well on the knowledge and competition. And that's what I mentioned, education and competition. But I mean, the brains, you have them. And you are 140 million brains, so that's good.
Okay. It seems to me that... Please.
Thank you. My name is George Polish, the Professor of Philosophy, and my question is connected with the problem of immigrants. And you've been talking about the European identity, about community, but still, we know that there are lots of people coming to Europe from all around the world, and there is situation within European countries itself. So, don't you think that this can be a problem for making us more united? Because when people come from, for example, Africa, they bring something to Europe from their home, and they add something that the traditional values of Europe, and, for example, African values, they can So, don't you think this can be a problem?
I don't think there is an easy answer to the question. First, Europe was always a continent of emigration. We became a continent of immigration. It started after the Second World War, and it was mostly in the colonial countries, the result of the people coming from the colonies. So it was especially France and Great Britain above all. A little bit in Spain, a little bit in Portugal, especially in France and Portugal. Then we had the boom and the prosperity of the 60s, 70s, and we need people. So we need people. In my country, the first to go were the Italians. And when the Italians came in Switzerland, everybody said, oh, they are not like us. Oh, we had the same reaction. And then came the Spaniards or the Portuguese. Then people were saying, no, the Italians, it's okay, the Portuguese, no. And then after them came the Turks. And then the same people say, well, okay, the Portuguese, it's okay, the Turks, no. And then these Turks, they became Swiss. We have even deputies that are Turkish origin. But then came the people from Yugoslavia and Kosovo. Then they say, okay, the Turks, okay, but the Kosovars, no, they are not like us, and so on and so on. So, first, immigration goes where it's needed. Where it's needed. People go immigrate to countries where there is job and work, and where we need people. When my father was dying in the hospital, there was not a single Swiss in the etage where he was in his bed. Not a single one. So without foreigners, who would have taken care of my father? Even the doctor was Swiss, had a Swiss passport, but his name was Skenderovich, not really Swiss. So, first, so immigration goes where it's needed. Then, of course, immigration creates problems. Problems, again, of perception. How do you deal, especially when you have the impression that the people coming are completely different, or the color, or the religion, or the color, or the ethnicity. Perception vary according to the speed and the concentration. The surge of emigration when the Turks opened the borders during the Syrian refugees, all these people who came, mostly were not Syrian, there were a lot of people from Afghanistan, or from North Africa, and so on. People react badly. People don't react badly if 100,000 people come during 5 years. But if 10,000 people come in one day, there is a reaction of rejection. So, all these people need the time to adapt, and the society, of course, has to adapt to integrate them. You say, does it change more laws and values? No, it should not. I think if you go to a country, you respect the laws of the country where you go. I think there I would not think we should make a transaction. But the huge majority of these people who came, they just wanted to do a job, and they fully respect it. Of course, then it's being used for political purposes. But I looked at the statistic in Switzerland, criminality, for instance, how many Syrian refugees were caught because of criminal activities in the last 2 years. You know how many? Out of tens of thousands, not a single. And if I talk to some people in Switzerland, they would tell me, oh, these refugees, they come, they attack the women, and so on. I checked all these statistics, not a single case. So, again, we should be careful. Is it perception or is it reality? I don't say immigration is not a problem. Of course it's a problem. Like everything politics has to do with it. Education is a problem, climate change is a problem, a peaceful resolution of conflicts is a problem, all of them. But it can be solved because we are human beings. And I think we have the ways to solve
it's a long discussion. We would need 2 hours to discuss about it. But I think immigration, look at America. If America is now the strongest country in the world, you think it's because of what? It's because of immigration. Immigration that makes America the most powerful country today in the world. So I think we can use migration exactly on the same way. But we have to manage it on a human way, on a clever way, and we have to be strict. You have to put the principles and the rules in the countries where people come. If you call me, if I'm in Russia, I respect Russian law. Fine, it's okay. And if you come to Switzerland, I would just expect you to respect our rules. For the rest, it's okay. Sorry, it's a short answer. It's not a very good answer. But your question is so important, it would need many hours to take an answer.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Россье.
Sure.
I think we can continue for hours, and I would stop the discussion only with a wish to see you again here, to see you again at HEC in order to continue our dialogue, in order to continue our better knowledge of your country and of Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As a sign of our wish to see you here, the calendar of our university for this year. Thank you.